Game of Thrones creators might not write all their upcoming Star Wars movies.
So much to be thankful for.
How's it going, everybody? This is Phil. After episode 9 exits the theaters, there's going to be a 3-year gap, and we'll have Disney Plus picking up with shows like The Mandalorian and hopefully the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. If we can only hope and wonder if that's going to be something worth getting excited over, with Ewan McGregor coming on board. Like I said, it's a step in the right direction. We have to see who's actually going to be handling that show, who's going to be directing, who's going to be writing, and what story they're looking to tell. And then, of course, we have the the show that no one asked for, Cassian Andor. So those three things are going to kind of fill in the gap a little bit as far as getting your live action Star Wars is concerned. And then we move on to the trilogy of Benioff and Weiss. So D&D's first movie is going to be coming out in the year 2022. And as of now, much like the Rian Johnson trilogy, which I still can't believe is going to actually be happening, but we really don't know where they're going to be going with their story. We don't know if it's going to be Knights of the Old Republic, but apparently that's being written by Leta Kalogridis. As far as I know, Leta's not linked to Benioff and Weiss as far as their trilogy is concerned. A lot of people had anticipated Benioff and Weiss possibly doing a Knights of the Old Republic movie, but there's been no solid confirmation as of yet if that's going to be the case, or if they're tied in with Leta, who is currently working on Knights of the Old Republic. So with all that being said, all that information now added away, it looks like what we have is these two guys are not going to be writing the scripts for all three of their upcoming films as far as it relates to Star Wars. So let's go through this article, see what's going on. I'm over here on Cinema Blend, and the author is Adam Holmes.
What's up, Holmes? What, son? Yes? Let's go.
That's right, let's go. So while the Game of Thrones series finale was met with polarizing reception, I mean, that is putting it lightly, to say the very least. That show got eviscerated by the fan community. I mean, they completely destroyed it. People were up in arms about the way that show ended. I mean, you could see it coming over the hills, the decline towards the latter end of it. I was not a person who had watched it from the beginning, but I heard rumblings from people who I knew that were fans, and I binge watched the whole show in a week. And I mean, I lost a lot of sleep over that. And for me, the impact of the decline of the show wasn't really the slow burn that other people got to see, because I watched it all in almost one entire insane show binging marathon, and my emotional investment wasn't there like longtime fans who had invested years of their time reading up on the show, discussing the show, debating the show, anticipating what was going to happen, this huge buildup, and for me personally, I did find it to be a very underwhelming finale, and I can't even imagine just the the disappointment for fans. I feel so badly because as a Star Wars fan, I've gone through a lot of the same stuff, and here it is. These guys are crossing over into my misery, which is Star Wars, and it's got me concerned now as somebody who actually went and watched Game of Thrones to kind of get a beat and see what these guys were all about. And look, I mean, that Game of Thrones, that petition, as of making this video, it's at 1,714,000 signatures. I mean, HBO said they're not going to come out and remake the show. That would be absurd. They're not going to rewrite and reshoot season 8. I mean, over $100 million to do that and get all the actors back. But it just goes to show you how passionate the fans were, and how widespread just the disappointment was, that nearly 2 million people would sign a petition to get that show remade, the final season, and try to salvage it in some way. So anyway, sorry about the little tangent here. So that was polarizing reception earlier this year. The showrunners, D&D, have a bright future ahead of them post Westeros. I mean, we'll see where their reputation follows them, and if they're able to produce something when they don't have a blueprint that's been laid out for them, like George R.R. Martin with his books. Unfortunately, he didn't finish the story that he was looking to tell, and these guys had to pick up and try to do it themselves, and it all kind of fell apart when they didn't really have anything to follow and were left to their own device. Now, these guys have proven that if all the stars are aligned and they are completely invested, they can actually come in there with material that is there to work with and produce something great. They did it those first several seasons of Game of Thrones. They really were. They were amazing. I mean, like I said, I watched it in a week, but it quickly became an addiction. And the first few seasons, really good, just amazing. Everything was just so well done. But the question is now, do they have the chops? Do they have enough to actually create some type of an outline or a structure or a blueprint for them to follow on their own? Can they create their own roadmap to get them from the beginning to the end of a show? And is it going to be satisfying, or is it just going to be some kind of subversive piece of shit, which a lot of fans are worried about as far as Star Wars is concerned? So it says it was announced last year that the duo are working on their own Star Wars trilogy, and they recently signed an astounding 5-year deal with Netflix for which they could earn as much as $300 million. This cannot be sustainable. The way Netflix is throwing money around, and all of these other streaming services are coming out. Disney Plus is coming out. I think Warner Brothers, AT&T. There's so many streaming services coming out now. It's getting to the point where it's like cable. It's got to collapse, and there's going to be a mass exodus because people are spending too much money on all these different streaming services. They're going to flee, just like they did with cable television, and they'll end up going back to figuring out another way to watch the shows that they like. And that's when things like these $300 million contracts will become few and far in between. So anyway, however, now that D&D have hopped from HBO to Netflix, it's possible this may impact how much work they're doing on the Star Wars franchise. According to The Hollywood Reporter, the men are currently writing the treatment for their Star Wars trilogy and are committed to fully writing at least one of those movies. At least one. Maybe half of one. Who knows? You get what you get and you like it. You know what? Look, it's not. Is that the worst thing in the world? Again, what's the big knock on J.J. Abrams? He can start off strong, but the guy isn't necessarily a finisher. A lot of people can throw anything and everything up on the screen or into a story and establish and get it up and running, but to finish, to have a satisfying finish, because everybody has in their mind how it should end or how they want it to end or what to them would make it a satisfying ending. But to actually close something out so it's universally heralded and accepted as something that they never saw coming, but yet they were all fully, wholly satisfied, that is a huge task to take upon yourself, and there's a tremendous possibility that you're not able to deliver those goods universally to the whole entire fan base. Like, you're never going to make everybody happy, but you can also really fall off a cliff and fail hard and go down in flames. And maybe as it relates to Benioff and Weiss, maybe them kind of setting up a story, providing a treatment of where it's supposed to begin, where the middle is, and where it ends up, and then handing it off to other writers who can take that and then fill in what their treatment is. Maybe that is actually the best case scenario. So it says, beyond that, though, it remains to be seen if they'll write the other two installments, as was the original plan, or if they'll be involved with this arm of the Star Wars franchise beyond writing. When it was officially revealed that they were tackling what was vaguely described at the time as a Star Wars film series, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss would also produce. While you'd think that could still be the case, even if they only end up writing one Star Wars movie, perhaps this deal with Netflix now prevents them from contributing as producers. And again, this might be a case of these guys biting off, more than they can chew. I mean, they were working on Game of Thrones. They took the deal with Star Wars. A lot of people felt that they rushed Game of Thrones and finished that so they could start working on Star Wars, and now they got to deal with Netflix, so now it seems like their attention is going to be over on Netflix when they should be working on Star Wars. These guys, it's like every time you turn around, you think you have their attention.
Squirrel!
So, I mean, who knows? You know, at a certain point, you got to think the quality starts to take a dip, because you want to know that you have somebody who's invested in what they're doing, and spreading yourself too thin is always going to result in a dip in quality. I mean, there's no way around it. You would have to be a superhuman person who never slept, who had a mind that was as sharp, razor sharp as a katana blade, to be able to stay on top of every single thing. Even with these two guys, their combined efforts, you can't possibly have that level of quality, that those first several seasons of Game of Thrones quality like that, spread across Star Wars and several Netflix projects or whatever else these guys got their hands in. I mean, it's insane. It's insane to expect that of damn near anybody, much less these guys who couldn't finish off a show when they had everything set up and they spent years with the characters and couldn't deliver the goods when it all came down to it. So maybe something has just shifted in the writer front, where now that the men are partnered with Netflix, they have to divert some of their focus from Star Wars to the streaming service. I'm imagining that's what it's going to be. A source who spoke with THR said that Netflix's brass were informed about D&D, their Star Wars schedule, but aren't concerned, as they weren't expecting the duo's first output for 10 years. So 10 years! This is what a gig. We'll pay you now, and you could do something 10 years from now. With that mindset, one would think that these men would ideally have enough time to pen all three of these Star Wars movies. Sure, they would, but if that's all they invested themselves in. I mean, George Lucas invested himself primarily in Star Wars when he did his trilogies, and every 3 years you got a new movie, and you know, he spent time prepping and working on effects and dealing with the art department and set design and creature design and designing spacecraft and figuring out where his stories were going to go and what his character motivations were, and working with his screenwriters. And George Lucas, say what you want about the guy, especially as far as it relates to the prequel trilogy, but he was invested in what he was doing. You didn't hear George Lucas was going off and taking other deals and working on other projects. He worked on Indiana Jones in between the original trilogy, but that was also him and Spielberg together. I mean, two of the greatest powerhouses in Hollywood come together to produce another film series. And that seemed to work out just fine as far as that was concerned. But these guys, they're all over the place, and can they handle it? That's the question. But perhaps enough things have changed that now they just want to get things rolling and then pass the proverbial ball off to someone else. Maybe that's, that seems to be in their best interest, I would think. And let's not forget that this isn't the only new Star Wars trilogy officially on the way. With The Last Jedi's, Rian Johnson is also working on his own trio of movies that will. I still can't believe these movies are going to see the light of day. I'm completely baffled by this decision to stick by this round-headed idiot. Similarly to what Benioff and D.B. Weiss have planned. He's going to move past the legacy characters because there's none left to destroy. They've all been sullied at this point. There was also reportedly a Knights of the Old Republic movie written by Avatar's Leda Kalogridis. She also worked on Alita Battle Angel, so that is a positive. I mean, she has some other. She worked on Terminator Genesis as well, but at least her most recent work is Alita Battle Angel, and this could be the very first entry in a new trilogy. I mean, you would think with the Knights of the Old Republic, if they're just adapting the actual stories to screenplays, and you have a competent screenwriter, that could actually do really well. It's almost already written. It just needs somebody to come in and translate it for film. I mean, it's a little bit more involved than that, obviously, but I mean, you talk about a treatment. The Knights of the Old Republic, it was done years ago. It just needs to be put into the right hands. And if they're going to tell different stories set in that time period, that's a different thing altogether. But if they're going to tell stories that have already been told, and which Disney seems to like to do, because they don't want to necessarily have characters that have already existed, that people have a preconceived notion of what they're supposed to be. Disney wants their own stamp on Star Wars. This is why you don't get any of the original trilogy characters running around Galaxy's Edge. So anyway, it had been rumored that Benioff and Weiss trilogy could be set in the Old Republic time period, but unless new information comes to light, it sounds like Callie Rismus. So this is what I said earlier when I was just starting out. Keep checking back with Cinema Blend for more updates about what's happening with Star Wars on both the big and small screens. In the meantime, find out what's coming to a theater in this galaxy for the rest of the year. Okay, so that's their release schedule. All right, look, these guys, D&D, Benioff and Weiss, they're going to be doing their own trilogy. If they're going to be setting up just a treatment, okay, for their whole entire franchise, at least they can have an outline for it. And if they're going to pen the first script, then fine. George Lucas himself, I mean, he set the story up, and obviously, he was the screenwriter for A New Hope. And he did the overall story. You don't necessarily need to have Benioff and Weiss on this whole entire trilogy, their stamp on the whole entire trilogy as far as being deeply embedded in the process. If they give us a decent outline to work with, or they give their writers, their screenwriters and their directors a good treatment to work off of, a roadmap, a guide map, then it is possible you still get good quality Star Wars, and maybe that's the best case scenario as far as this is concerned, especially when they're trying to close out this trilogy. As far as a lot of people are concerned, them being involved with Star Wars after the Game of Thrones is something they don't want at all, and they've lost a lot of faith in a lot of the fan community from Game of Thrones that would have transitioned, and we're looking forward to them actually restoring great storytelling to the Star Wars universe. They've lost faith in them. So there's going to be a lot to prove to come out the gate and dazzle people with the first movie in their trilogy. If they can write the script and it's strong and it's well done and it's directed well and the performances are well done, and then they pass the baton off, not in the way that they did it with the sequel trilogy, where it's just one the right hand doesn't know what the left is doing, but there's an overall story there that the writers and the directors, they have to abide to, so it doesn't feel disjointed like it did from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi, now retcon and stuff going back to Episode 9. If they're able to have a cohesive story, an overarching story throughout the whole entire trilogy, but other more talented and accomplished directors and writers are able to be brought on board to work on the remaining films in this trilogy and finish it out strong, it is possible in a in a perfect case scenario that it could actually be a good movie, a good set of films, good entries into the Star Wars universe. Now again, time tells all, right? And we're not going to know until 2026 rolls around. So that's going to be years down the line before we finally are able to sit here and go, well, we knew from the beginning this was going to be shit. But again, we're not going to know. And look, and again, everyone could be dazzled with the first movie, and then it could all go to hell. But it remains to be seen. If these guys are going to kind of have a hands-off approach, in a sense, after the first movie gets underway, then maybe that's the best thing for the franchise. Although, for me personally, I like to know that a creative is involved and he's on top of what's going on creatively, and he's kind of helping to guide the ship, or the team that started the project. These two guys are helping to guide the ship, the vision. You want people to be on board with the vision of the creator. I think that is important. So it needs to feel cohesive and consistent throughout all three movies. Otherwise, it's just going to be a disjointed mess, and people are they're just going to destroy the film for that reason, because it's not following its own rules, and people are going to be quick to react to that because of what happened down the stretch with Game of Thrones. So anyway, guys, that's it. That's all I got on this. And let me know what you think down below. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys sometime soon. If I don't catch you for the rest of this weekend, have a good one. Be happy, be safe, be healthy. Take care. Bye.